It is my honor to be able to introduce award-winning novelist, political commentator, and journalist Ece Temelkuran. Her writing has appeared in publications such as The Guardian, New York Times, and New Statesman. She has twice been named Turkey's most read political columnist, and twice rated as one of the 10 most influential people in social media. Her book, How to Lose a Country, looks at political events around the world and addresses the startling trends of authoritarianism that are happening everywhere. The insidious marks of rising populism have truly become a global problem. And with her book, Ece Temelkuran directs the reader to recognize the 7 warning signs of democracy shifting to dictatorship. Ece also proposes global answers for how to face the threat of rising populism and persevere towards the defense of democracy. In a recent podcast interview with Andrew Keene featured on LitHub, Keene calls How to Lose a Country a spunky, sparkling polemic against the populist cult, and one of the first authentic responses to the siren song of anti-democratic populism. Everyone, please join me in welcoming to the podium Ece Temelkuran.
Hello, it's amazing to see you here. Can everybody hear me? I have a big voice. I hope you're here for me, not for the air conditioning. It's quite hot today. It is such happiness, such joy to be here in Politics and Prose, one of my favorite bookstores. I've been following its program. And thank you for coming such a joyful book. It is a joyful book, in fact. I am serious about this. It's not a joke. Many people think that How to Lose a Country, 7 steps from democracy to dictatorship, might be a depressive book, but in fact it's not. And I will prove you in 20 minutes why it's not. I'm coming from Turkey, and many of you might have an idea because we are in Washington. In Washington, people know about the rest of the world, as opposed to some other American cities. Turkey, as you might know, has turned out to be a really crazy country, and recently it has been, without naming it, the media, international media, and so on, categorizing my country as one of those crazy countries that anything might happen. So they don't really pay attention as much as they did 10 years ago. But my country was not as crazy, so to speak. It has become crazy. Whenever I speak about how to lose a country, especially to Americans, I always say that you are very lucky. You have Trump. No, seriously, you have an obvious one. 17 years ago, when AKP came to power, Mr. Erdogan, we didn't, his hair was better. And his political skills were 100 times better than Mr. Trump. And his sense of humor, well, he didn't have sense of humor. Let's not get there. But many of us, or few of us, in fact, few of us were aware that something strange is happening to democracy. And then a few years later, we understood that actually this is something that we don't know about. This guy is lying. New truths are manufactured. And he's saying that he's representing the real people, and he asks for respect. And we didn't really understand. We started laughing at him. We thought, oh, it's going to pass. This is a passing by fancy of, some sort of right-wing phenomenon. And then things got really horrible. But the most unbearable part of this story was not that having Mr. Erdogan who's damaging the democracy, but the fact that we have been lectured by Western intellectuals and politicians about how our democracy is getting better. That's why I say to Americans, you're very lucky. At least you don't have to be, you're not lectured by other countries' intellectuals, that you finally have the real people in power and your democracy is getting stronger. It has been a really, really frustrating 17 years for Turkish people. And lately, we had a local election, and Mr. Erdogan renewed the elections just because he didn't like the results, simply because of that. And we're going to have another election very soon. And I don't know what's going to happen, and it's not easy to predict, and it's not very joyful to predict that because in the recent local elections, the opposition, for the first time in 17 years, they managed to have this huge success in the big cities. So we sort of got the tiger by its tail, and as you know, the tigers do not respond very well to that. So, but once you get the tiger by its tail, there's only one option: you keep riding the tiger. So hopefully we'll be seeing that. So after 17 years of such oppression, Turkish people are still showing to the rest of the world that they are committed to democracy and that they are going to defend it against all odds. This should be inspiring to United States, the people in the United States who are concerned because of Trump, rightfully so, and for the people in Europe, because what they started to experience has been going on in Turkey for 17 years. And we kept more or less our sanity together in these 17 years. And imagine having a Trump, far better skilled Trump with better political skills and a real movement behind him, a real political movement, and living under that for 17 years. I mean, you guys couldn't really couldn't stand it only for 3 years. So we have been suffering a lot. A few years ago, it was really impossible to explain what we went through in Turkey. Now it's very easy to explain because entire Europe and United States and Australia even is suffering from the same political and moral disease. We call this right-wing populism because it's convenient, because it calms the nerves down, because we don't want to call it fascism. It is like, it has consequences to call it fascism. We don't want to call it right away authoritarianism because it brings a lot of depression as well. We call it right-wing populism, and for practical reasons, I call it right-wing populism as well. Every country in the world at the moment has its own mess. Britain has Brexit. You have Trump. France has Marine Le Pen, and every country, because of its right-wing populist leaders, witnessing the fact that their fragile consensuses are being shaken, and they are trying to deal with this mess as we did 17 years ago in Turkey, with excess of emotions, with confusion, with depression, with growing worry and fear, and a lot of emotional reactions. After living this in Turkey for 17 years, and after following the European news and American news, I wanted to write a book because what I saw in Europe and in United States was that despite the differences of these countries, despite the uniqueness of political conditions in every country, the right-wing populism operates exactly the same way in each country. That is why I put the subtitle 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. In fact, there are 7 global common patterns of right-wing populism. And these steps are, I don't want to spoil the book. The book is better than I, and it is far more subtle and sophisticated. But I'm going to give a very rough outline of the book so that you know the main idea behind the book. The first common pattern is they come to the political stage saying that they represent real people. This automatically put people like you and me in a very awkward situation, we automatically try to defend ourselves, saying that we are also real. But then as soon as you get into that discussion, you lose. And then as soon as they come to the political stage saying that they are the representative of real people, they ask for respect. And they want to be recognized as if they are a political identity. And they all say that they are beyond ideologies and above ideologies. And they are so not creative that they steal the slogan from each other, saying that we're going to make this country great again. It is so interesting. Like, every country is going to be so great. I think they won't fit in the world very soon. So this is how they start their political appearance. How they politically appear on the at the table of conventional politics. But as soon as they sit at the table of the conventional politics, they start elbowing out all the other political actors. And there comes the second stage. After sitting at the table, they start manipulating the debate and the discussion, not only in political sphere, but also in social sphere. They start disrupting the rationale and terrorizing the language. And how they do it is a funny thing, because when I looked at all the discussions, all the debates right after right-wing populists come to power, is exactly the same. They're identical to each other, even though they happen in different countries. And I deciphered a common pattern in this way of terrorizing the debate, political debate. So there's a fictitious dialogue in the book, in the second chapter, about disrupting the rationale. And it's between Aristoteles and a right-wing populist spin doctor. So Aristoteles goes crazy, like all of us do when we try to get into a proper conversation with a right-wing populist spin doctor. And then there comes a time, it is not, this disrupting the rationale and terrorizing the language is not limited to the higher echelons of politics. It doesn't stay in Westminster or in White House. It trickles down to the smallest towns of the country, and all of a sudden you see minions of right-wing populist spin doctors. It's as if they multiply by the minute. And they are so good at repeating the narrative that has been manufactured by right-wing populist leader or, his team around him. This is part of the second chapter and second common pattern of right-wing populism. And the third one is the most important one to me. It's about post-truth. In this country and in European countries, post-truth has become a very sexy concept to start with for several years now. But the problem is that this concept has been handled as if it's a practical question, as if it's a technical matter. If we do enough fact-checking as journalists, and if we, reveal the lies of the leader or the spin doctors of right-wing populism, we're going to get rid of this post-truth problem. Whereas I think that it's a philosophical, moral, and political problem which requires philosophical, moral, and political response. And I do think that this post-truth age did not begin when Oxford Dictionary in 2016 chose the word as the word of the year, but actually it began way back in 1980s, where we split our truth, where truth of humankind was split into two: my truth and the loser's truth, or my truth or the truth of others. And in the book, I gave the example which would be more familiar to American people than the rest of the world. I am pretty sure you all remember the black and white picture of the Vietnamese girl running away from the napalm attack. How many of you? I'm like, this is not a question. That black and white photo led millions of people to the streets in this country. They were saying, we are ashamed. This truth is making us embarrassed, and you cannot do this in our name. Whereas a few years ago, when a 3-year-old baby washed ashore, Aylan Kurdi, a Syrian refugee baby, washed ashore in Mediterranean, the shock lasted only 2 days, and then back to business as usual. So what happened to us between 1980 and now that we got so numb? And I do think that, the morality, that hegemonic morality of neoliberalism made us into these people, turned us into these people that we cannot feel, we don't have place, energy, or time to feel that this is our truth, this is our baby. And how did this split of truth begin? How did this, lack of shame begin? It began, ironically, I think it began when Baghdad, when Kuwait was first bombarded. I don't know if you remember, it was the first time they started splitting the screens, or there was this running band underneath to show the stock market numbers. So it was like one nation's or one people's tragedy became a cheerful fact for another nation. I think somewhere there we started losing our shame, and somewhere there post-truth began. Actually, the word of post-truth and I'm telling this in the book how it happened, was used in 1990s when war in Bosnia began by a Bosnian intellectual. So it's not a new thing. Therefore, I do think that right-wing populism is the monstrous child of neoliberalism, morally, politically, and philosophically. We might, or you might, think that if we get rid of Trump, it will be all over. We're going to go back to normal again. It's not going to be like that, because there are millions waiting to support such a figure, such a reckless, ruthless, and relentless figure. And it doesn't matter if we get rid of Trump, Erdogan, or Orban in Hungary, or Nigel Farage in Britain. They're going to be replaced by other political figures, because what we are going through is a zeitgeist, and it's a moral and political transformation. So it is not only about United States, it's not about these leaders, but it's about all of us. So this is the third step, very roughly. The third common global pattern of right-wing populism. And the fourth is dismantling the judicial and political mechanisms. Normally, this happens much later, when the right-wing populist leader begins to show authoritarian inclinations, when he has enough power to invade these political and judicial mechanisms. Whereas in the United States, it happened like overnight when government shutdown happened after 2 years of Trump's presidency. It was so interesting because the entire American establishment had to come together to keep the government going on. So many people think that I launched this book in Europe in several languages. So whenever this crazy lady from Turkey with crazy hair coming to them and saying to these Europeans, my country is actually has gone through this, and you're living what we have been through. So let me tell you what's going to happen to you. It's not a good thing for Europeans. They don't like this. And probably Americans wouldn't like it either, because I know how it feels like when somebody else coming from outside the country and telling your story back to you. It's not a good thing. But I have to I keep telling Europeans that neither the maturity of your democracy nor the strength of your state institutions will protect you from this. Because there is a certain way they dismantle the mechanism and the basic human reasoning. So you have to be sure that institutions and the democracy won't save you from what's coming towards you. So these leaders do not all of a sudden grab the power and then start ruling as a, dictator. And fascism does not happen overnight. It's not bad guys coming along all of a sudden, beating up the good guys. There is a creeping period. And we know about this period, but not well enough. We have this experience from Second World War. And we all most of us read Hannah Arendt, Adorno, all these guys who told about how things happened. But we have to remember that these guys were defeated as intellectuals and they had to run away from their country. So they actually couldn't really tell how it really happened. How did that, this silent approval took place? Actually, right now we are seeing that all of us, in United States included, because when the government shutdown happened, when it stopped, we thought it's all over. Or when Mr. Trump toyed with these institutions, changing the, executives and so on and so forth, all of a sudden, 4 times, something happened in the understanding of institutions in the United States. I know, I tell this because the same thing happened in Turkey. Without even noticing, you all somehow, not you, but many of the people thought that, then CIA was not that big, or FBI was not that, strong. So it's like the entire state institution was a paper tiger that can be toyed with. One cannot really understand it when it's happening. But first thing the right-wing populist leaders do before completely invading the state institutions is that they present an image of state and they present this superfluous image of state. So you think, so this is normal now. It can happen. So the threshold of normality changes, in fact. So this is the 4th stage. And 5th is, I love this part, it's about political humor, which would apply to Americans and British especially. Political humor is a great thing, and I love jokes, but political humor starts operating as a defeatist reaction to what we are going through. I was here in New York 2017. It was 3 months, right? Yeah, 3 months after Trump came to power. I was giving a speech in Women in the World Summit at Lincoln Center in New York. And there were more than 3,000 women. And there was this nervous energy. They wanted to laugh, and they couldn't even wait for another Trump joke to laugh. So it was like, they were so ready to laugh. It was as if they were trying to calm down their anxieties like we did, for several years. And then I told the audience, be careful, because you're laughing a lot, and, pay attention how you laugh and why you laugh. And then after 1 year, I was in the same place, sitting with Hillary Clinton, and, on the stage, talking to the same audience, and nobody was laughing. So, political humor must be paid attention to, because it operates to feel strength as opposition, as the concerned people, but then it starts feeling too comfortable, and it becomes a shelter as if, and one does not want to get out of it. And the fact that we forgot, one of the arguments of the book is that through 1980s and after that, we have forgotten that we are political subjects. We consider ourselves political objects. That's why the motto is so popular, have been so popular for the last several decades. I hate politics. I don't follow politics. There is no such thing. And this is a very political statement. It means that you're agreeing to be a political object, which is a very nice thing for a dictator. So that laughter somehow legitimize the fact that you're a political object, that you cannot change anything, so laugh about it. So the sixth common global pattern is designing the citizen, and it's always about women. It starts with women. I don't know. I think these right-wing populist leaders always think that, you know, women are Play-Doh, so they can be messed around easily. So they think that, you know, changing the women and creating their ideal citizens out of women is an overnight job. So they all start with women, from Hungary to United States, from, I don't know, Philippines to Turkey. And that is why it's not a coincidence that women react first to right-wing populism, because they feel the danger for the first. They're like, canaries in a mine. And the seventh step, which I hope this country won't witness, is designing your own country, which means it's too late, because then they start criminalizing, stigmatizing the opposition, and their people are the only real people, and the rest of the population is, disposables. As one of the disposables, I'm no longer living in Turkey, so I hope you won't lose your country as we did. When I say I hope you don't lose your country, I don't necessarily mean that you might have to leave this country. All of us, actually, on different degrees, losing our country. All those people who are concerned in Europe or in the United States or in Turkey, they feel that they are no longer living in that country that they know. This is a different country now, and the ground is shifting, and absurdity and insanity is taking over as if. So even though you are living in your hometown, in your homeland, in your own country, I think our dreams have been wrecked, and our dreams or our realities even have been wrecked by this political insanity that is conquering the entire world. So I wrote this book for Americans, for European people, not to lose the time that we did in Turkey, and not to do the things that we did and failed. I hope you do a better job. Thank you for listening. If I depressed you enough, you can start.
Ready?
I don't know. Is it ready?
Testing. Is it on? Actually, I want to toss out two questions. One, I have a feeling we're all in the same place here, our brains. I think it was number three, where you talked about who's responsible. I would like you to elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think we all struggle with how did this happen. And then a second question is, what do these people want? When I hear the Fox News people at night, the ones who go on with so many lies to protect Trump, I wonder, why are they doing it? What's the ultimate goal? So if you could address.
I don't want to spoil the book. I mean, like, if I tell you everything, what do they want is a great question. I don't think they want anything. This is a 21st century problem, because in 20th century, the dictators or the leaders, they all had some sort of ideology, but this time. And I keep on calling them right-wing populists because there is ideology in it, but there is no ideal in their perspective of the world. What they're after is power, and then more power. End of story. And some of us, as I did in Turkey several years ago, can burst out and ask, how can they be so cruel? How can they be, especially when the refugee children were separated from their parents in this country? I heard a woman say that on a video. How can they be so cruel? I'm like, the answer is easy, because they can. Many of the things you find absurd, incredible, appalling, shocking, they are doing it because they can, but we have a job to understand this as well, and because we want to reverse the tide, so to speak. But we cannot reverse this tide, and I told about this in the book a lot, with family therapy techniques. You cannot, this is so interesting. This is partly because people forgot that they are political subjects, because many people think that, and journalists as well, okay, how can we find a consensus with these people? How can we talk to these people? How can we... First of all, this is not politics. And I think people forgot how we do politics. You come up with a counter argument and you organize people and you mobilize people. This is how politics are done. Old school. People talk to each other. Yeah. I think we all, you asked why did this happen? I think we all forgot the joy of solidarity. This is why it happened. It's not because, right-wing populists are more intelligent or they are using the political tools better than people like us, let's say. But the other part of the political spectrum was cut so badly that it was, the place, the entire stage was left to right-wing people. And you are living in a country where Kardashians are the most, important people. So having Trump as president is completely consistent with that. So it's not only a political matter. It's also a moral, social, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, there are many people in the United States who are concerned with right-wing populism, and from Democrats, from, I don't know, even Republicans and so on. The problem is they want to deal with this situation without making a criticism of neoliberalism, which is so desperate and impossible. Because we are dealing with the child of neoliberalism, with the child of right-wing conservatism. So sooner or later, they will have to deal with the fact we all have to review our understanding of neoliberalism. And all these people, and there's that in the book as well, there's the real victimhood and there is the manufactured victimhood. Real victimhood, people feel their dignity is stolen. Okay, it's not only the inequality. It's not only the fact that they are dismissed. It's not even the hunger, but the dignity. Dignity is stolen, and it's not only from the poor, from the rich as well. Because we have to live in this world where we have to be numb, that is indignified. And there is anger growing, but then this anger is mobilized and organized by those politicians who talk about pride. And there is a big difference between dignity and pride, although they sound quite similar. Dignity is a word that calls every one of us to solidarity, to brotherhood, to, some sort of love. But whereas pride is an angry word, and it calls to people to have a fight. And these guys are promising the masses this. I know your pride is broken, so I'm going to make these corrupt elites kneel before you, and you're going to spit in their faces, and your pride will be intact again. So this is not a technical matter. This is not a practical matter. And we have to deal it with such seriousness. If we take this problem seriously, we have to review our way of life, our, understanding of politics, and the the broken promises of neoliberalism. Well, it didn't trickle down, did it? All that money didn't trickle down. This is why we're living it. And I think they were patient enough. For several decades, people waited for that kind of wealth, this wealth, to trickle down. They were promised that, and now it's not trickling down. So they are, falling for the simplest of promises. I'm sorry, sir. I kept you waiting.
No, that's fine. I arrived a little late, so if you touched on what I'm going to ask you about, my apologies to all of you. Could you, without throwing around terms like neoliberalism, which I think, well, I don't know. I mean, that I know it has a definition, but I think we might disagree on what words like that mean. But what could you identify maybe 2 or 3 key moments in Turkey's recent history? Moments that were missed, moments that the Turkish people could have done something differently that would have a different culture in Turkey today. Just some lessons that either the Turkish people or the rest of us around the world could have done differently, moments that were missed. Might be a lesson for us here.
Yeah. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Mr. Trump said that I'm going to investigate. Actually, he said it before as well. I'm going to investigate these investigators. Yeah. And, it's a funny thing. I'm like, that is a very important turning point. Once it's said, it should be taken seriously, because that is against all the, tradition of state. It is against a very important consensus that judiciary is something we trust and we take it, and that is independent and so on. So one of those turning points was something like that in Turkey. Also, almost exactly the same when prosecutors started to be appointed by Mr. Erdogan. But it didn't happen like Mr. Erdogan came to the office and said that, okay, from now on, the prosecutors, I'm doing that business. It didn't happen like that. It happened like this, and it's happening in this country as well. First, there's the legitimization period. And it doesn't happen with only the core supporters of right-wing populism. They either buy out other intellectuals which are more or less more prominent and trusted, or they kind of lure these intellectuals to their movement. There are examples from United States in this book, how some of your intellectuals, how some of your opinion makers changed the idea when all of a sudden war was, the subject. So one of them said, that, Trump, although he was really against Mr. Trump, all of a sudden he said, now he acted like a president or something. These are the moments that happen quite invisibly, and then it makes an effect on social and political sphere. And all of a sudden you see that, you see Mr. Trump or his ilk being normalized. So Turkish politics or European politics, it's happened exactly the same way. This is why I'm not giving, there are a lot of examples in the book, but right now I'm not giving you. But it's exactly the same way. These examples, these turning points operate as, happen exactly the same way. Any more questions?
Yeah, hi.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
First, it's wonderful that you're bringing these things up.
Thank you.
And it's interesting that it's from another country. What I want to do is offer what's going on, some of the dynamics, and put the personalities aside for the moment. Because a lot of the personalities always exist, but the opportunities for these personalities and this type of expression to happen are pretty unique. And they're happening now, as you described, throughout the world. One thing is, we're caught in a state right now of the world where we have more people than we can manage. In other words, it
is true. I know.
we don't have the management systems to handle the size of the population that the world has right now. That is one of the critical things. The other part that's very important is that we don't know what to do. In other words, there's no model out there. There's no thought process developed as to which we can look forward to and sort of try to correct what's going on. So these personalities are going to take advantage of this. Now, one other thing is that the neoliberalism part is very interesting. And I might put myself in that category to some degree. But that element also has at stake their well-being. In other words, a lot of the neoliberalism is still well off, still getting Social Security, Medicare, or whatever there is out there. But my point is that that group that used to fight the right, so to speak, doesn't know what to do. In other words, I don't know how this is all going to break out. I don't know what's going to happen to my old age if our country has to start honing back on its use of resources. So
May I? Yeah.
Thank
you for your contribution.
Yeah.
And they're good.
Yeah, no, I
very
wanted
good points. Oh no, seriously. I don't know if you watched the latest Davos, most recent Davos meeting. There was a guy, a Dutch historian, who said, "Well, it's not rocket science. Rich should pay taxes." And all of a sudden, wow. They don't like you when you say those things in such places. But even in Davos, there is a problem. The gentleman is right. They cannot find a poster child anymore. There is no hero that they can show and make people look up to. And my argument in the book is that neoliberalism does not have a good guy. Who's the good guy in neoliberalism? Every ideology has an ideal person, ideal citizen, whatever. Who is the good guy in neoliberalism? Who would you say, for instance? Just throw names, Bill Clinton? Obama? Yeah. I think we can all agree that they are lacking in on several levels, morally and politically and so on. So, and I'm not talking about the politicians here. I'm talking about the, big capital owners who are supposed to be the happiest and the most successful people of the system. Warren Buffett. Great. Bill Gates, who's philanthropist. You see, all these examples are failing, and they're not good examples to start with. So neoliberalism does not have a good guy, and this is something to think about, and I discuss this in the book. I hope you'll find it interesting, because this is the place, this is the point that we have to discuss before hating Trump. Trump actually is the guy, the system, created, and he's the successful guy. He's the happiest guy. He's the ideal citizen, so to speak, except for lying openly or, doing things ruthlessly and so on. Seriously, when power is sacred, the most powerful gets to rule the world. So, please, sir.
Merhaba, Melih Çakmak. I'm from Turkey. I guess you can all tell now. I've been living in the States for like 25 years, and I have to congratulate you, first of all. You got something great out of our misery. That's all I can tell right now. But
it's to cure our misery. Don't worry.
Yeah, I understand that 7 steps, and hopefully that's gonna be a great lecture for all over the world. My question here is, since I've been living in the out of my country, I was able to see what was going on in Turkey more objectively. And me and my wife, she's also here, Gamze, we kept talking about what was going on in Turkey, how the things are changing. We were able to see that from here much better than the people living in the country. And my question to you here is, you mentioned that you don't live in Turkey anymore. So do you think that's the reason you were able to write such a book? You were able to see what has changed, what is changing?
I mentioned the excess of emotions earlier, and there is a lot about that in the book. Not a lot, but there is some points in the book which should be really helpful, hopefully, for those countries who are subjected to right-wing populism recently. It exhausts you. If you depend on, reacting each time that Mr. Trump does something, and if you trust your political and intellectual energy, thank you, you can. But then if it happens every day, a few times every day, these absurd things, and it happens in your, personal life as well, with your grocery store guy, with the taxi driver, and so on. And then it happens for years, you get emotionally exhausted. And the horrible part is, you start losing faith in humankind. You start thinking, maybe the humans are banal, after all. Maybe I should give up on humankind, And this is a very... it is a depressive place to end up to, intellectually and morally. I do think that I have a moral duty to believe in people, to believe in humankind. Therefore, I do, out of duty, though. So after I get out of the country, and it was a funny story, maybe I'll tell you later on, I start thinking again, like really peacefully thinking, although I wasn't thinking about peaceful things. I was thinking again, because when the power is primitive and absurd and ruthless, by time you become primitive, ruthless, and I don't know, absurd as well. After years of an authoritarian regime and extreme partisanship in society, there was a famous case in Turkey, horrible case, about kids being raped in a religious foundation for years, systematically, little boys. And partisanship is so strong in Turkey at the moment that because of this religious foundation is a supporter of Mr. Erdogan supported the foundation. And those journalists who reported about the systematic rape were imprisoned. Okay, can you imagine this? This is like beyond whatever imagination. Okay, what is the intellectual's job there? What is the writer's job? Opinion maker's job? My job became this. Don't rape kids. Raping kids is not good. This is primitive. And this is not what I came to world to do. This is so below my... What can I can give to the world? So yes, when I went out of the country, I kind of, blossomed in a way. But the reason I wrote the book is not because of that. It's because there is actually nowhere to go anymore. The other day, an Italian journalist friend of mine asked me, texted me saying, so where do we go from here? When Salvini started, his show. Actually, in Europe, people are, seriously considering this. Where are we going to go? especially British people, they have been for 3 years now, they have been queuing up in front of the European embassies to get a European Union passport. And when they ask me about, so you're an exile, how does it feel to be an exile? They have this romanticism about, oh, poor girl, she ran away from the barbarians and threw herself to the arms of civilization and so on. And I asked them, okay, if I'm an exile, what, who are you then? You are trying to run away from Britain, the, strongest of democracy. So you're an exile as well. All those Americans who are so depressed and they want to leave the United States because of Trump, what are they then? Aren't they exiles, even though they're in their own country? So yeah, answer your question is yes, it gives you a perspective and it makes you understand how, and it took me years to say this out loud, heartbroken you are. I am heartbroken. And it takes a lot of courage in my case to say this because I come from Middle Eastern country. You're not traumatized in Middle East. You don't have this, things that luxurious countries have. You don't get heartbroken. They mock you if you say things. So say things like that. So yeah, but then I understood. I realized that I am heartbroken because my home did not want me. It's a horrible thing. Thank you for asking the question. Sorry, madam.
Wait. I was next.
Can I say something?
No. We have enough questions here. We need to try and get through everyone. Sorry.
Sorry.
First of all, thank you very much for coming. I've been a big fan for quite some time. When I lived in Turkey, which was the beginning of this decade, your cover of the Roboski massacre was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, I lost my job because of that.
Yeah. Well, you were the canary in the coal mine, actually. So I wanted to ask you kind of two questions which are related. It seems that the Western media can't give up on their love affair with Erdogan. And, just recently I saw coverage on Guardian, CNN, New York Times about Erdogan's brave defense of the Uyghurs just a few weeks ago, with no mention of the way that Erdogan has treated Turkey's Kurdish population. The hypocrisy was insane. And it also seems that once a week, Al Jazeera tries to gaslight us into thinking that Erdogan is a good person. So why do you think that Western media can't give up on Erdogan? Why do they still love him? And also, I'm wondering if you can characterize some of the ways that Erdogan has lapped up to Western neoliberal leaders. For example, Barack Obama said that, famously declared he loved Erdogan and would ask Erdogan for advice on how to treat his daughter and so on and so forth. I think Obama's quite embarrassed by that comment now. But how was Erdogan able to appeal to these people and become their friends in the last decade and the earlier part of this decade? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a sad time when everybody was in love with our leader. I don't see many of those, though. I mean, like you said that they are still in love, but but I want to mention the time when everybody was openly in love with Mr. Erdogan. Mr. Erdogan is a very lucky guy. I was in Malaysia interviewing Anwar Ibrahim, who is almost a similar figure in Malaysia, and they are like peers, sort of, one in Turkey, one in Malaysia. And Anwar Ibrahim told me he's a lucky guy, and he was in his house imprisoned when he said that. He's lucky because the timing was so correct. After 9/11, when this country was dealing with its own trauma, the war against terror and so on, and in overseas there was the war against terror, and this war against terror had to be ideologically supported. So they came up with this super amazing idea, which was called perfect marriage of political Islam and democracy. So the idea was find a moderate Islamic guy, make him free market friendly. He must be free market friendly, and he should be Muslim, making Islamic references, and he should have the power to call all these radical Islamists to some sort of legitimate sphere. So that guy was Mr. Erdogan, and Turkey was chosen as the model country for the rest of Middle East. That's why Mr. Erdogan all of a sudden started appearing on the cover of Time magazine, on the cover of Economist and New York Times. Blah, blah, blah. So we were, in fact, the guinea pigs of a giant experiment as Turkish people, and now this experiment has failed. So unfortunately, we are the guinea pigs of a failed experiment at the moment, and it's so depressing. And it was so incredibly hard to explain what Turkey is going through to Europeans and to Americans at the time. I gave speeches in Harvard, London School of Economics, the House of Commons in Westminster, and people were looking at me. All these, highly educated, sophisticated intellectuals, academics were looking at me as if I'm a mad woman. They were like, she's this woman who hates democracy. So that period was the hardest period, if you ask me. They understood what's going on in 2013 when Gezi uprising started. That was a time that, it was obvious that this experiment is failing. But then on, they understand it completely wrong. Now they think it's all about Erdogan. If you get rid of him, everything will be all right. It's not like that anymore. Unfortunately, if you give a right-wing populist leader, an authoritarian leader, 17 years in power, he creates his own generation. It is the heartbreaking part of the story is this, because now there are these millions of people who are the minions of AKP, let's say, and I cannot communicate with them. They think that I am the mother of all evils, for instance, or people like me. It is a polarization in its extreme, sort of. I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but I wanted to tell these.
So I'm going to interrupt for just 1 second. There's 2 questions at each microphone, so that'll be all we'll do. But everyone who is currently in line to ask a question,
we'll keep it short. I'll keep it short as well. I talk too much.
I can't wait to read the book.
Oh, thank you.
I'll say that because I've been very concerned.
Somebody had to say this to calm me down.
I've been very concerned since I heard Trump's announcement speech. I was actually worried a little before that. But as a first-generation American, this idea of, and knowing the ideals that drew both of my parents, who are now deceased, to this country, and to see those very aspects destroyed by the person who currently inhabits the White House. I have a very difficult time calling him the president. So my question really, because you broke down those 7 series that go towards this right-wing uprising, I was just wondering, where do you see the U.S., and if this is in the book, I understand, but where do you see the U.S. on that spectrum?
Yeah, I feel like I wrote a thriller, what's going to happen in the U.S.?
And the reason why I'm asking is because I'm hoping that there are some keys in the book that might give the people who are here and energized to try and find a way to fight it. Because although my father was a psychiatrist, I realized you can't talk to these people like normal people. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it gets right to that point. If we can't recognize our humanity, if we can't be kind, then we are losing the very thing that makes us human.
These are all going to pass to start with. And fear is not a good thing. Fear always, operates in the most evil way. So fear and depression is not necessary. The reason I wrote the book is to call people into global conversation. And right now in Europe, in several languages, since the book is published in several languages, people are talking to each other, and it makes me so happy. And they keep telling that, oh, now I feel less alone. And when you feel less alone, that's the beginning of human interaction, and that generates a political energy. This is going to be a political fight. So, first of all, we have to acknowledge that. It's not going to be a nice conversation, a sweet chat. No, it's going to be a political struggle. So therefore, this country is very lucky because Turkey had it for 17 years. France and Germany is going through it. And after that, it swam through Atlantic and it arrived here. So you actually know, you can know what to do. The only thing is, I don't want to call this arrogance. I want to call it reluctance. Please give up this reluctance of looking at the other countries. And I said the same things to Europeans as well. Okay, Turkey might be a crazy country, I know, but please listen, because this is happening exactly the same way. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is I need you. Because as I said, this has been really exhausting for people like me in Turkey. So we need the intellectual stamina of other countries as well. We need another global wave, which is operating completely the opposite direction. And we can create that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm also from Turkey, a journalist. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. I have one short comment and one question about Turkey's opposition. We always talk about those in power, but the opposition in Turkey is absolutely fragmented and divided, and I don't have an answer or why it's so weak or divided. I want to know your opinion about it. And the second thing is about post-truth politics. We always focused on right-wing populism, but when we look at George Orwell or Raymond Aron or Hannah Arendt, it's not just about right, or it's mostly about authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And Hannah Arendt's chief criticism not just was fascism, but also Soviet-style totalitarianism. Should we reconsider the term of post-truth politics in that sense? Thank you.
Well, some of the questions, some of the things are so simple to me, but somehow I think because of the intellectual fashions, and there are intellectual fashions, we seem to forget that they are simple. Why opposition is weak? Because there was a military coup in Turkey in 1980s, and the hegemony of right-wing politics has been devouring the world. They killed people, like in my country, in Middle East, and so on. There was the Cold War, so there was this anti-communist thing. The massive wave against communism. The thing is, there was a totalitarian regime there, but this war created an intellectual fashion. And it created Fukuyama, who said, this is the end of history. The humankind has completed its ideological development. We cannot go beyond this, and so on. And all of a sudden, we started thinking that way. Yeah, this is the end. We cannot do better than this. Look at the world. If we cannot do better than this, we have to explode this planet and call it a day. So this is why the opposition is weak. First, they have been literally killed or imprisoned and tortured and so on. And second, there was a global intellectual fashion who almost banned us talking about the leftist ideas, or not even leftist ideas, about equality. This is so funny, by the way. I find it quite interesting. I don't know, 5 years ago, probably, I was in United States. I don't know which university I was giving a talk. And I talked about socialism. And I remember people oh. And now it's all over the place. So, you see, things are changing. I don't say that be a socialist, that's the only way. But if you cut one part of the political spectrum, the other part grows enormously. And, it gives these strange fruits, as Billie Holiday once said. So, This is why. Post-truth is a longer question, and I think we are running out of time. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
But I'll find you and talk.
I teach political science at the university here, particularly Middle East politics, and I'm originally from Egypt. So may I suggest another book that could possibly be How to Win Your Country Back? Okay, because I actually see on university campuses where I hang out, this situation has actually posed or presented an opportunity and a challenge. And I see a lot more organizing. I come from the trade union world. So for us, the idea of organizing and collective action is incredibly important, as well as freedom of association. So actually, I'm seeing a lot more organizing. So I guess what brought me up to the microphone was when we were talking about leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay and fight.
Fantastic.
And organize.
Thank you for saying that.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that, because advocating to leave is that's not a solution.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So thank you. So every crisis represents our challenges, and that would be a good quote in Davos meeting, I think. Opportunities. So there's an opportunity. But what is being political means is quite diminished in the last several decades. So political engagement is, I think, quite reduced to shouting or, hating and tweeting at this point and so on. One last thing, and thank you for your comment about not leaving. Please do not leave. And until you have to, and I hope that day won't come. One last thing. I think everybody likes to do these Second World references when they're talking about right-wing populism, Hitler references, Nazi references, and so on. I do think that First World War references would be more correct. Because we are we are going through an industrial revolution as well, and we are going through the biggest crisis of representative democracy since the Second World War. A lot of things are happening, and there is this immense refugee crisis, and there is the climate crisis, and this is the first time in human history that we can calculate the end of planet. So these are too much to bear, and people are afraid, basically. But from fear comes the fascism, whereas from joy comes every other kind of politics. So we have to remember the joy of politics, and we have to remember that the politics should be standing upon human dignity. And I bet this world will be coming up quite a lot in next years, not only in this country, but also in Europe, because what we lost along the way when we were accumulating wealth was that the small people, in quotations, need their dignity as well. And when they don't get it, they get angry. And when they get angry, it becomes really, really dangerous. I hope you like the book, and I hope it opens your mind, and I hope you feel less alone after reading it. Thank you so very much for coming. Thank you.